Hello, everybody. It's Dina, and I'm here today with Darryl Rodgers, and he is a family recovery coach. And he is going to talk to us today about what do we do when we find out our son or daughter has a drug or alcohol addiction. And I know he uses drugs to describe both, but I wanted to say that at the beginning so you understand we're talking about drug and alcohol. So, welcome, Darryl, and I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Thanks, Dina. Good to be here with you. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to parents. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to deal with when you find out that your child is addicted to drugs or alcohol. Um, and I think that leads to a good question, like, how do you know they're addicted? Sometimes that's a tough thing to determine. I think parents a lot of times have a knee jerk reaction early on when they find out that their child is using drugs, which is totally understandable, especially in today's environment. There are a lot of drugs out there that well, first of all, fentanyl is very pervasive now. It's everywhere, and it ends up in other drugs that wouldn't normally be fatal. So, yeah, it's a concern. It's a big concern. So, first thing I'm going to do is say there is a guy out there named, he goes by Tall Cop. His name is Jermaine Galloway. And I would suggest, if you're having doubts about whether your child is really addicted or not, the first thing to do is you have to do a little bit of investigation. And I would caution against the whole reaction thing. I want you to respond instead of react. Don't blow up. Don't allow your fear to cause you to really say things to your child that can put up a wall there. You want them to communicate openly with you. So um, try to make sure you're in a calm state of mind before you have that conversation with them. But then back to Jermaine. Jermaine is a former police officer, and he does a lot of presentations on what to look for, especially in terms of drug paraphernalia and things like that. So you may want to go take your child to see a therapist, because if they're using drugs, even if they're just experimenting, if they're doing much at all, it's probably more than what you think. And it can quickly go from just casual use to an addiction, especially with the drugs, the power of the drugs that are out there today. So you want to be on top of it. You maybe get them a therapist, because if they're using, they're probably there's something they're coping with. There's some kind of an underlying issue that they're coping with that is causing them to go down this path. So you want to quickly get to the bottom of that and try to nip this in the bud.
Thank you, Darryl. Maybe before I forget, would you tell everybody where they would find Jermaine or Tall Cop?
Jermaine, yeah. Um, I think it's tallcop.com. But if you just do a search for Tall Cop, you'll find him.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think it is to your point, it is easy to have a reaction that could cause more um, building a wall or more um, fighting or negativity around it. And so I think that's a really good point. So you were going to talk about difficult decisions and how you would move forward once you have this information.
Yeah, definitely. If you feel like they have an addiction, or they're quickly headed towards becoming addicted, or if you have that question in your mind, um, uh, there are some very difficult decisions to make. And it's a little bit different with a teenager versus a child who is over eight. Well, a teenager who's over 18, or they're legally an adult, basically. So if your child's under 18, the decisions are different. Um, if they're under 18, you can tell them they have to go to treatment. They don't really have an option. They could, yeah, there's a lot of different things that could happen there. They could try to run away or something along those lines, but you really have a lot more control. And that's where you really need to reach out, find some good help to seek wise counsel, find some people that you can trust, get all the information that you can. But I do see parents get hung up here a lot. They're afraid to make a decision, particularly if we're talking about, and I know we're talking about teenagers here today, but if we're talking about a child who's legally an adult, you may need an intervention to be able to get them into treatment. A lot of parents get hung up on that. With an intervention, you're usually giving them, and depending on the type of intervention, there are different types, but a lot of parents get hung up on, giving them an ultimatum. And in the Johnson model, which seems to be the most prevalent, that's part of it. You give them an ultimatum. You pack your bags and move out, or you're going to treatment. We'll pay for it. It's up to you. And a lot of parents are really scared to do that. It's a scary moment. But and I would recommend um, longer term treatment programs normally. And that gets into another whole discussion that can get pretty complex. But it's expensive. Treatment is expensive. There are some less expensive. Don't let that scare you away, because there are some less expensive alternatives, and parents need to find out about those. But uh, we're talking about your child's life here, and uh, literally their life is probably most likely hanging in the balance. They're not trying to scare you, but it's just the reality of it. And it's important to not delay, to be decisive, take action, in spite of the fear. Get as much good information as you can, make a decision, take action, and don't let the fear stop you from doing what you need to do.
That's good advice. It's hard though. I mean, I've never been in that situation. I know you have, Darryl. And if any of you want to hear more about Darryl's story, he has written in our first Scars to Stars book, and there's an interview with him on our YouTube channel as well. But I have talked to some other parents who have been through something like this as well, and it is really scary. And I think it also really depends on the relationship you already have with your child or teen, and if they're already close to you enough to where they're going to talk to you about these things, or maybe there's already a wall there that is making it more difficult. And if you have that situation, what would you suggest for parents to how for them to go about having these conversations?
Yeah, that's a really really good question, Dean. I'm glad you asked that. Um, you know, we all can improve our listening skills, and that's one of the biggest keys to communication, to effective communication, is learning how to be an active listener. And it's one of those things that none of us are ever perfect at. We have to keep working at, over the course of our lifetime. And this is something where I think parents can increase their effectiveness. Most parents can really increase their effectiveness with their teens. Um, and so, just a couple of quick tips on that. Obviously, try to make eye contact. Don't stare at them all the time. You look at different parts of their face as you're talking, but definitely make eye contact when you're having that conversation. Like I said earlier, respond instead of react, and try to get to the bottom of what's going on. And the way you're going to do that is not by like a Spanish Inquisition or whatever. It's not to ask all these probing questions, but when they're expressing their feelings about something, you may not agree with what they're saying. First of all, be aware of your body language and your facial expressions, because you can be saying one thing but completely communicating something different with your body language, and that takes practice. That takes practice, because it's really easy, and I'm the world's worst. If I'm upset about something, it's all over my face. So to try to um, uh, get that under control is sometimes a little bit difficult. But along those same lines, I would say that you want to validate their feelings. In other words, you may not agree with what they're saying. And so you see some of the key phrases that you might use would be something like this, like, um, yeah, let me ask you a question about that. Is this what you're saying? Let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Um, and so you kind of you paraphrase what they said. You say it back to them. You reflect it back to them, and that lets them know that you heard what they said. Now, you may get it wrong, or they may think you got it wrong. So that's why you use that question: Is am I right? Is that what you're saying? And that gives them the opportunity to correct you, and that's okay. Is give them that opportunity to say, no, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. And you have to really lower your defenses. Maybe if you feel like you're going to get into that situation, and tempers could flare, and you're really emotional about it, you have to kind of take a few deep breaths, before you start the conversation. Try to get yourself calm. And if the octave goes up, if the voices, if the volume continues to go up in the conversation, excuse me, when their volume goes up, try to lower your voice. Bring your voice back down. Speak calmly. Speak softly. They will hear what you're saying a lot more. And I don't mind telling you, I have a military background, and I have a booming voice. I grew up singing in the choir. I have this kind of a bass baritone kind of voice, and it can be very effective at getting people's attention when I need it to. And that can be an asset. But if you're like that, if you're a dad and you're out there listening and you're kind of like that, you need to learn how to also, when you really want people to hear you and you want them to know that you're hearing them, lower that tone, and just speak in a calm, quiet tone. And that can be very effective at de-escalating things when things are beginning to heat up with the conversation.
Yes, that is true. And I think, to your point earlier, that when there is an addiction occurring, there is something else going on. And I think that it could be a lot of what we talk about in general, in all of our events and our books and everything, is like, who are you surrounding yourself with, and protecting your mind, which is part of our hope course on our website. And it's, you are the combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if your teen is hanging out with the people that are doing drugs and those things, then that's what is influencing them. And I don't know that you can change that. I mean, you might have some advice about that, Darryl, but I think that the other thing I wanted to point out is, like, if they're really dealing with depression, or they're dealing with anxiety, or they're dealing with bullying, which we're also going to talk about today, um, those are underlying things that could push them into this place as well. And so I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit from your experience.
Yeah, that's a really difficult thing, and when they're teenagers, they're in this transition stage from child to adult, and they want um, to be respected, to be understood. They want the admiration of their peers. They want to be accepted by their peers, and so sometimes because of that, they are subject to peer pressure. And you know, obviously, the younger they are, the more opportunity you have to mold the way they think, and try to reinforce uh, values that will hopefully, get them around other kids, and think about the company that they're sharing. Get them around other kids who are, from families who have similar values and who are behaving the way that you would like for your child to behave. Um, However, it's if you're later in the game, that's going to be difficult. You can have conversations with them, and you can, control it to the extent that you can. Know who their friends are, know about the meet the parents of their friends. Do everything you can to control that as much as you can. Of course, if they're under 18, you can enforce certain rules. It gets a little bit more difficult though as they're becoming an older team, because they're going to push back against that, and that can become a wedge in your relationship, and you really don't want that. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there. Um, uh, you know. In terms of them going down the wrong path, yeah, that definitely is what happened with my son. Um, here's a big factor: confidence is key. When they lack confidence, they are more. They're looking out. They're looking for the acceptance of their peers even more so. Um, so I've always encouraged parents. I think this is a big problem that we have now, is a lack of confidence in our teenagers and young adults, and everything that you can do to build their confidence, um, in their, just overall build their confidence and in their abilities and everything. That will go a long ways towards, um, you know giving them a foundation that will help them avoid becoming a um, peer pressure casualty, or a peer pressure statistic. So yeah, I would. I like, first of all, I'm a Christian, so from my perspective, I think um, it's very important to get them grounded in the Word of God, and get them into church, and put them in every situation that you can to help them develop that relationship with God, and to develop spiritually, and there will be a lot of confidence that will come from that. Aside from that, I think that um, you know I like positive affirmations, but there's no better positive affirmation than the affirmations that come from a parent to a child. So, when um, we tend to, as parents sometimes, and I think it's just a people thing. Okay. We tend to focus on the negative. And so what I would say is try to not spend try to spend as little time on the things that they're doing wrong as you can, and try to spend as much time praising them. Try to catch them doing things right, and spend as much time as you can praising them for the things that you see them doing right. And that will go a long ways. Now, in terms of positive affirmations, it's, you can write positive affirmations for them. Um, I've got an old website. I don't use it that much anymore, but and maybe I should move some of these over to my website. But I've got a website called Power Word. I think it's powerwords.com. I have to, or Power Tools. Power Tools. I have to look up the link for you, Dina. But there's actually um, uh, uh, little downloads, PDF downloads that they can get there that have positive affirmations for youth that they can read. And I have a book that I wrote that is actually geared towards teenagers, and it's all about building confidence. And that that is I believe one of the keys to helping them be able to deal with the peer pressure, so that they can push on past that and not be lured into experimenting with drugs.
That's really good. I didn't know about that book you have or that website. So that would be really, I think that could really help. Um, yeah, I think like in my own life, my parents were always very, now that I hear you talk about that, they were always telling me I could do whatever I wanted, like whatever you aspire to or whatever you want. It was a lot of positive reinforcement, even when I didn't
Mhm.
realize it, I think, in my life. Um, and that didn't keep me from having issues when I was a young adult, but
Right.
it did get me through high school. So I think that's a really good point about affirmations and just catching them doing something right. Like you said, I think it's important to um, acknowledge that for sure.
Yeah, and I kind of look at it too as sort of like planting a seed.
Mm.
So even if they go through a rough spot, you've planted that seed there, and at some point that can come back up, and they will remember those. The things that you say are locked in there. They may not remember every word,
Mhm.
but the things that you say are in their mind, and you planted a when you plant positive seeds, they tend to come up at some point.
Mhm. That's true. That's really true. I want to ask you about the marijuana situation because I live in Colorado. It's been legal for a while. And I know you are having some issues with that in the state where you live. And I didn't know if you want to talk about that, but it might be good for parents who are in either situation, whether it's legal or not legal, and the ramifications of both. Because if there are teens that are underage using marijuana where it's not legal, like I assume there's more ramifications for them than there are for people in states where it is legal.
Yeah, well, it's really been, to a large extent, in almost every state, decriminalized, if that you want to use that word. In other words, I think law enforcement now, I think the general attitude is that they have bigger things to worry about.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that's the best attitude, but it's just a reality that there are a lot of big issues, that they're facing out there. So, but in terms of what's going on with marijuana right now, it was the biggest issue that my son faced. He was addicted to marijuana, and a lot of parents don't realize. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. People think, oh, it's not addictive. That's one of the myths. It is very addictive, and when you go back and look, I graduated from high school in 1978, but the marijuana that people were smoking then was about 2 to 3% THC content, and then in the mid 90s, the growers began to selectively breed the plants to create higher THC content, and it got up to around 18 to 20%, and but that's not all. There are different types of wax extracts. There's dabs. Dabs are pretty popular, and that dabs can have up to 60% THC content, and it goes all the way up to like 99% or 100% THC content. So it's not the same drug. It is a powerful drug now, and when we're talking about marijuana, parents need to realize we're talking about all of those things, not just when somebody's smoking a blunt or whatever. So uh, there's that issue. There's the issue of impaired driving on marijuana. It does impair a person's ability to safely operate a motor vehicle, and unfortunately, law enforcement just doesn't have the same kind of tools to get marijuana impaired drivers off the road that they do for alcohol. It's different. It just metabolized differently in the body. So, but here's the thing that I see. Um, that increased potency is creating a lot of problems for people that we didn't have much of a few years back. And, I started facilitating a peer support group for parents who have children who are addicted to drugs or alcohol 5 years ago on a volunteer basis. And when the parents in that group early on, mostly their kids were having issues with opioids. But now all of the new parents coming to my group, when I ask, well, what kind of issue is your child having? Like, it seems like 90% of them are like, they have a problem with marijuana. They're addicted to marijuana. And there's even this condition called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome that most people have never heard of. And I know it's a mouthful, but you can go to Facebook and look. There are two different support groups that I'm aware of that are big support groups. I'm sure there are others for this condition. It's known as CHS. And I'll repeat the word again, it's cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. ER physicians are very well aware of it because they see it quite frequently. And what happens is not a very pleasant thing. The people who are using marijuana, and it doesn't affect everybody. And there's a lot of things we don't understand about it, but the people who are using it, who come down with CHS, they start to throw up and they cannot stop throwing up. And it will get so bad that they have to be hospitalized because they lose body fluids. And they get some relief from getting into a hot shower. And so some of them will have second-degree burns on their back and scarring in some cases just from staying in the hot shower so much just to get some relief from the nausea. The only way for it to go away is for them to stop using it, and they can never use it again. And you go in those support groups and you will see that they will admit, I'm addicted. I want to stop because I know it makes me sick to the point that I have to go to the hospital, and I'm having a really hard time fighting off these cravings. So yes, very addictive. Um, then there's a lot more issues with psychosis related to marijuana use now, and I think it's because of those increased um, THC levels. So yeah, a lot of issues with it. Don't take marijuana use lightly because it can escalate quickly. And not only that, but they can, a lot of times it is a gateway drug from the standpoint that when they begin using, is stimulating dopamine production, and it's not natural dopamine production. So the brain, it's kind of like, okay, well, um, this person is giving me this, stimulating this dopamine artificially. I'm going to dial back my natural dopamine production, and so what happens is you can't ever. You're always looking for a higher. You have to go higher and higher and higher with the stimulation of that dopamine production to be able to achieve the same high. And so they will turn to other drugs to get a bigger dopamine spike. And that's how they end up, with on some of these other drugs. So yeah, parents need to be aware of this, and they need to not take it lightly.
Thank you, Darryl. That's really good information. And I think the other thing that I've heard, I've never used marijuana, so I lived in Alaska in the 90s when it was legal and I was around it, but I wasn't ever a user. But there are people who talk about marijuana being laced with other drugs.
Oh yeah.
Like when you were talking about fentanyl earlier, like what is your experience with that and what kind of drugs people are putting in it and what that does?
I'm hearing a lot about fentanyl ending up in pills, and they're, pills that look like they look real, but they're homemade. And sometimes I think it's intentional that the dealer or whoever's manufacturing the pill thinks, oh, we put a little bit of fentanyl in here, we'll give them a bigger high. They're going to want more of this. They'll be addicted, and they'll come back for more. And they don't really care about what happens. They don't really think about that, if somebody overdoses or not. The other thing I think that happens, I think it's probably more often the case, is that fentanyl. It only takes, if you look at like 3 grains of salt. That's about the amount of fentanyl that it takes for someone to overdose and have a fatal overdose. And of course, it depends on the tolerance levels of the individual. It's going to vary from one person to the next, but and depending on if there's prior use. But yeah. So what happens, I think, a lot of times is you have a dealer that's dealing a lot of different drugs, and there's an accidental, what's the term I'm looking for here? Uh, but they accidentally end up getting some of the fentanyl into one of their pills. But I'm hearing it a lot with like Percocets is what I'm hearing a lot. But I'm sure there are other pills too that end up with fentanyl in it, and it does happen sometimes with marijuana as well for some of the same reasons. Um, yeah, very dangerous thing. So if they're using really any drug, it's totally different landscape now. You go back 20, 30, 40 years, or even not even that far, even 10 years, you could go back that far, and kids could experiment a little bit with drugs and kind of get away with it, but I know of a lot of stories, a lot of situations where it was a one-time use, or maybe there was just a little bit of light experimentation, and they ended up getting a fatal dose of fentanyl. So this is unfortunate, but this is something that parents need to be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy to me because I study suicide rates a lot, and it's crazy to me how suicide rates and overdose rates are separated. And I mean, I know there are accidental overdoses, but
Hmm.
a lot of them should be in the suicide numbers. And I think
Yeah.
the numbers that we know from the CDC and things are not what I think are the real numbers,
Hmm. Hmm.
especially around veterans. And so it's just, this problem is so big, and there's so many people in the world that don't even, they've never been touched by suicide, so they don't
Hmm.
really understand how important this is. Um, and I think that the ages of suicide victims are getting lower and lower and lower, and we're having like 9-year-olds and 12-year-olds that are taking their lives, and the easiest way to do that is with a pill. And it's it breaks my heart, and I don't, people have asked me for a year or more, to talk about this subject, about teens and about kids, and I've shied away from it because I've really not feeling like I'm an expert in that arena. So I really appreciate you being here and talking about this, because you have a lot more experience with that than I do. Um, and then, do you think that maybe parents, as a preventative measure, could have conversations around this? And if that was the case, like maybe you have a preteen that is, you don't suspect that anything's going on, but what kind of conversation could you have with them to warn them about this? And what would you do in that situation?
Yeah. Um, yeah, definitely with the preteen. I think because um, gosh, it's it's crazy to think that you would have to have that conversation with a kid that's in, first through fifth grade, right? But definitely by the time they're in middle school, um, and your own child, and you have to uh, let your gut tell you what to do on that. But when to have that conversation. But definitely, in while they're in middle school, I can, that's a perfect time in my opinion, early middle school, and you just have to sit down and educate them about the dangers that are out there, and go back to the whole building the confidence thing. You have to look back at COVID. Think about all the things that happened during the lockdowns and all of that. Um, it is really, really weird time that does put a lot of stress on people, and especially young people who are trying to figure out the world and figure out life and figure out what life is all about and figure out themselves. And now you throw all of this stuff in, and it is leading to a lot of, I think, a lot of depression. There was, you talking about the suicide with pills and everything. It is hard to know. It's difficult to know the numbers. How many of those what were classified as accidental overdoses or suicides that we just don't know. There's just no way to know in a lot of cases. But I can tell you that I think it was 2021. There was 108 or 109,000 was the final count. Overdose deaths, and certainly a good percentage of those were suicides. But anyway, yeah. Uh, Definitely parents need to have that conversation as early as they feel like,
Mhm.
probably maybe a little bit earlier than you think you might need to. And we need more people who are educated on the subject getting into schools, so that they can talk to the kids at school about this situation. And I go back to building that confidence, build their confidence.
Yeah, I agree with that. In 2020, the overdoses in Denver tripled,
Mm,
and that's just what the government is telling us. Like, who knows what the real number is, but it was um, a huge jump, and marijuana is legal there and it has been for a while. So I just, it makes me want to understand more about the causes and what's involved and what drugs and those things. But I don't know that we'll ever know the real answer to all of that. But what I do know, um, and what's in our event description, is that suicide is the third leading cause of death in young people between the ages of 15 and 24. And 5,000 young people complete suicide in the US each year. That's that blows my mind.
mm,
Um, there are approximately 10 youth suicides for every 100,000 youth. Um, and in adults, that's triple or quadruple that number. And then each day it says there are approximately 12 youth suicides.
mm,
Um,
mm,
so anything we can do to change that. And I think that there are probably teens that have gotten mixed up in an addiction that we're talking about, and it ends up being what we think is a suicide, or maybe it's an accidental overdose because of the trajectory of what they're involved in, and not knowing, or maybe they're taking something and they don't know there's fentanyl in it or
mm,
anything like that. And so I think this conversation, I think, is so important, for parents to understand, because there are parents out there who haven't ever taken drugs and don't understand it
mhm,
or
mhm.
know it, or have any idea that their kid is maybe even using. So I think this is very educational, and I really appreciate your expertise on the subject.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here. I didn't even touch on along the same lines the social media. Social media is a big factor, and that's something that parents need to take into consideration. What kind of controls they're going to put over that and electronic devices. Um, and certainly, at the end of the day, I want everybody listening. Um, and this applies not only to the parents, and how they relate to their teens, but I want everybody listening to know that they are loved. And I think that's important for parents to convey that
Mm-hmm.
message to their teens. Um, but it's a message that we all need to get out to people in general now, because so many people do, uh, they're hurting. A lot of people are really hurting now, and they don't realize how much they're loved. And so that's something we can't do enough of, is to just communicate that to people, that they are special, they're here for a purpose, and they're loved. And especially to the parents listening to this, make sure that above all else that you convey that to your teenager on a regular basis.
Yes, agreed. And we do talk about kindness a lot in this community, and just whether it's your child or a stranger, how we can be more kind, and it just makes the world better in general.
Sure.
So Daryl, will you tell everybody where to find you and what you do, so they will know how to find you if they need your services?
Okay. So you can go to thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. And there's some other places to find me out there on the internet, quite a few places, but that's the main place. I will mention that I do have a TikTok account, and there's a lot of good videos there. I think I've gotten a lot of good feedback from people. But what a family recovery coach does is, a family recovery coach coaches parents who have a child who is battling drug or alcohol addiction. And there are decisions that need to be made early on, that I talked about earlier, that a family recovery coach can help with. The communication issues are important, and then it's important to learn about setting healthy boundaries, learning how and when to let go of certain things. And that's really what a family recovery coach does. We're not a therapist, we are a coach. But a lot of parents deal with enabling issues surrounding this, surrounding having a child who's battling addiction, um, uh, rescuing issues, what we call codependency, and worry, chronic worry, fear. And these are some of the things that, as a family recovery coach, that I help parents learn how to cope with, how to manage those emotions that come up. So, if there's something I can do to help you, please reach out to me. I would love to talk to you. This is my calling, my passion. I love people. I love working with people, and I really uh, feel for parents who are going through this situation, because I've been through it myself.
Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate all the parents that are here to learn more, to help their kids.
Thank you for having me, Dina, and for everything that you're doing to raise awareness about suicide and suicide prevention. Is so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And this is pre-recorded, and at the event we are going to have some live Q&A. So here we go.